This text message changes everything about the feud. What started as a quiet disagreement behind the scenes has now shifted into something much bigger after newly unsealed legal documents revealed private messages that appear to place Taylor Swift far closer to Blake Lively's side than previously suggested. According to publicly available court filings, texts from late 2024 show Taylor reacting to developments around the ongoing creative dispute involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, including anticipation of a major media story that had not yet been published. The messages, which surfaced as part of Blake Lively's deposition, have added a new layer to a narrative that Taylor's representatives previously framed very differently. Until now, Taylor's team had maintained that she was unaware of the tensions unfolding at a private meeting in New York and had not taken sides in the conflict. These documents, however, suggest she may have been more informed and engaged than the public understood at the time. In one exchange cited in the filings, Taylor appeared to comment on Baldoni's public posture, implying he sensed something significant was coming. In another, she discussed strategy around the film's promotion, noting that her association with the project could influence the balance of power. While the tone of the messages was informal and private, their release has prompted renewed scrutiny of how deeply Taylor may have been involved behind the scenes. Blake Lively later testified that she shared script revisions with Taylor during a meeting at her apartment, emphasizing that there was no obligation to review them. According to the deposition, Taylor responded enthusiastically and later expressed support for the revised draft. Blake described Taylor's presence as reassuring during a tense creative moment and later thanked her for standing by her in what she viewed as a difficult situation. What makes this especially notable is the contrast between these details and the version of events previously shared publicly. Taylor's team has said she did not expect Baldoni to be present at the meeting and did not intend to participate in any confrontation. The newly revealed messages don't definitively resolve that contradiction, but they do complicate it, raising questions about how much was understood privately versus what was communicated publicly afterward. At the same time, the documents show Blake and her husband Ryan Reynolds reaching out to several high-profile figures in the industry, asking for support for Blake's preferred cut of the film. These communications, described in the filings, reflect a broader effort to rally allies during a dispute that had moved far beyond creative differences and into questions of control, reputation, and influence. And this is where the story takes an even more complex turn. As more details emerged, it became clear that this wasn't just a disagreement between two creatives on a single project. According to the same documents, Blake continued to advocate strongly for her version of the film, even after being told by studio leadership that audience testing favored Justin Baldoni's cut. In response, she reportedly doubled down, saying that her perspective, along with the author of the original book and Taylor, aligned on how the story should ultimately be told. That moment is important because it reframes Taylor's role from passive supporter to someone whose opinion carried real weight in the room, not as a decision-maker on paper, but as a trusted voice whose endorsement mattered to Blake during a critical phase of the process. From an industry standpoint, that kind of influence can quietly shape outcomes without ever being officially acknowledged. Meanwhile, the messaging happening behind the scenes painted a far harsher picture of the conflict than what audiences were seeing publicly. Texts described in the filings show Blake and Ryan Reynolds privately characterizing Baldoni in deeply unflattering terms, while simultaneously lobbying friends, executives, and fashion world power players to support Blake's vision. None of these messages prove wrongdoing, but they do illustrate how personal and emotionally charged the situation had become. This context is why the release of Taylor's messages has landed so heavily. For months, the public narrative suggested she had been unintentionally pulled into the dispute, possibly even misled. The unsealed deposition doesn't outright contradict that claim, but it strongly suggests she was not entirely in the dark either. Instead, she appears to have been aware of the tension, aware of the stakes, and emotionally aligned with Blake during key moments. At the same time, it's worth noting that private texts don't always reflect long-term intent or public positioning. Conversations between close friends often use exaggerated language, inside jokes, or emotional shorthand that can feel very different once stripped of context and placed into legal documents. That distinction matters, especially when fans and commentators rush to draw hard conclusions. Justin Baldoni, for his part, has largely remained measured in public statements, letting the legal process and studio decisions speak for themselves. Studio executives have acknowledged creative disagreements but have not publicly endorsed the more extreme characterizations described in private messages. That gap between private frustration and public restraint is another reason this story continues to evolve rather than settle. So, where does this leave Taylor Swift? Not as the villain of the story, and not as a completely uninvolved bystander either. Based on what's publicly available, she appears to fall somewhere in between. A powerful friend offering emotional and creative support, whose words now carry unintended consequences because of where and how they surfaced. The bigger question now isn't just who said what in private, but how these revelations will affect long-standing relationships moving forward. Will this change how Taylor navigates friendships tied to professional projects? Will it reshape how studios manage informal influence from major stars? And will any of the people involved choose to clarify their positions publicly, now that these messages are out? What happens next may not come from another leaked text, but from silence, or from who decides to break it.